how should scientific reason and biblical interpretation be related together, given that religious faith and biblical interpretation are connected? It is not right for us to change our interpretation of any text, in this case the biblical text, on the basis of what science says. The fact that science discloses certain things about the world doesn't mean that suddenly I'll say, oh, well, Genesis must have meant something quite different then, mustn't it? That has no rational justification. But what can happen, historically has happened, and ought to happen, is that if something strikes us as scientifically well-grounded, if that's how it strikes us, and it collides with something in the Bible, and we have some reason to believe the Bible, then we're entitled to ask ourselves, are we reading the Bible rightly? Of course, entitled to ask ourselves also, are we doing the science rightly? Well, let's just think about the Bible here. This is exactly what happened, really, overall, with the case of the Copernican revolution and Galileo. The perception that a scientific discovery is well-grounded, the perception that actually there is good evidence the Earth goes around the sun, forces people to go back to the Bible and say, not we'll change our reading because science says it, but read the Bible saying, as a matter of fact, did the Bible ever say that the sun goes around the Earth as a scientific statement? They said, no, it doesn't ever say that. In its own right. That is the Bible in its own right. You're not pressing it to some odd reading. Many have adopted precisely this position with Darwinism. They have said, we think that Darwinism or neo-Darwinism is well-grounded scientifically. That's what we think. If that is the case, and the Bible in Genesis is taken literally, we are in difficulties if we are Bible believers, let's use that phrase. So we're going to go back and look at Genesis, and when we look back at it, we say, actually, this document should not be read literally. It was not intended literally, not meant literally. There is evidence within Genesis that it should not be taken literally. In fact, the more we go into it, the more we find that a literal reading betrays a complete distance from the world of the ancient Near East and Genesis. Now, for a moment, I'm not going to say who's right or wrong there, but the point is, what's happening is that religious believers, or Christian believers in this case, are conscientiously saying, maybe we're reading our Bibles wrongly, but when then they go back to the Bible, they don't say, I'm going to read it differently because Darwin said something different. They're saying, let's try to read it on its own terms. We realize now that we haven't been reading it correctly on its own terms. Read on its own terms, it's not even making certain anti-Darwinian claims. But that seems to me to be a proper way of relating scientific reason and religious faith. That where it is the case that science seems to be delivering certain claims and truths, where it collides with the Bible, and have some reason for believing the Bible, then the right thing to do is say, okay, maybe I wasn't reading it correctly. Now, of course, you might still say, but in the end, couldn't it be a collision? Well, we could talk about that. But I'm talking here about Darwinism and what happened to reading strategies in relation to Genesis. In the light of Darwinism, although historically, as I say, the reading of Genesis was controlled more by discoveries from the ancient Near East than by Darwin's own work. But still, in the wake of Darwinism, that's the way many people have read Genesis. They've read it non-literally, on its own terms.